Welcome to the debate. Today we are looking at a pretty massive tectonic shift in how organizations manage their technology costs. We're talking about an $83 billion shift.
Yeah, it is huge.
Right. So according to the State of FinOps 2026 report, which represents, nearly 1,200 respondents, two massive structural changes have occurred. First, 78% of FinOps practices now report directly into the CTO or CIO organization.
Which is an 18% jump from just 3 years ago. I mean, that is incredibly fast.
Exactly. And second, 90% of those teams now claim they manage SaaS spend alongside their traditional cloud infrastructure. So I am taking the position that shifting cost governance away from finance and embedding it directly into platform engineering is really the absolute only structural way to finally eliminate the persistent $265 billion in annual cloud waste.
And I am arguing the exact opposite. Moving this critical financial function onto the CTO is frankly a dangerous illusion. It actively masks skyrocketing costs while completely ignoring the reality of the massive shadow-procured AI software crisis we are currently living in.
Well, to understand why this shift into the engineering org is necessary, we have to look at the mechanical failure of the old model. The original finance-sponsored FinOps playbook failed fundamentally because the people controlling the money and the people actually provisioning the infrastructure were separated by this massive organizational chasm.
You mean the classic spreadsheet guilt trip?
Exactly. Finance would receive the AWS or Azure bill at the end of the month, right? They'd spend 2 weeks parsing the data and then produce these beautiful color-coded reports showing that a specific engineering squad had, say, 40% over-provisioned their database instances. They would hand that report to engineering.
And engineering would not politely say, we'll put it in the backlog and absolutely nothing would change.
Right, because finance spoke in dollars and engineering spoke in story points and deployment velocity. But today, roughly 45% of large enterprises are building and mandating internal developer platforms. By moving FinOps to the CTO organization, it ceases to be this aspirational recommendation from a finance analyst. It becomes an enforceable, coded architecture standard.
Okay, but...
And just quickly, on expanding the scope to include SaaS, that's just a necessary recognition of reality. SaaS now represents 35% of total enterprise software spend. You simply cannot govern enterprise tech costs today if you are only looking at the public cloud.
Look, the maturity narrative that the industry is pushing right now is a complete fabrication. Moving this function under the CTO inherently changes the definition of success to protect engineering budgets rather than optimize company cash flow.
I wouldn't call it a fabrication.
Well, let's start with your second point, because that statistic that 90% of FinOps teams are now quote-unquote managing SaaS is an industry-wide lie.
A lie? That's a strong word.
It is. Think about it. Cloud infrastructure FinOps relies on consumption-based, real-time, programmable billing APIs. If I spin down an EC2 instance, I stop paying for it that exact second. SaaS does not operate in that universe.
Well, no, of course not.
Right. SaaS is contract-based. It's locked into rigid enterprise agreements and bound by true-up clauses. What we are really facing in 2026 is an AI SaaS cost crisis. We are talking about shadow procurement by business units buying tools like M365 Copilot at $30 a user per month, ChatGPT Enterprise at up to $100 a month.
Yeah, the per-seat costs are astronomical.
Exactly. And this spend is entirely invisible to traditional cloud billing feeds. Shifting this responsibility away from the CFO strips the organization of true financial visibility. It replaces hard cost savings metrics with, malleable unit economics that engineering leaders can and absolutely will use to rationalize absolute bill increases.
I think you are underestimating the sheer power of putting cost controls at the point of creation. Let me explain how this operational shift actually works in practice, because the mechanism is what actually closes that action gap we were just talking about.
Okay, let's hear it.
Under the old finance-led model, FinOps was essentially a passive fitness tracker. It simply logged how inactive you were over the past month. You looked at the dashboard, felt guilty about your massive cloud waste, and went right back to your old habits.
Fair enough.
But CTO-led FinOps, embedded directly into platform engineering, is a treadmill that physically adjusts its speed to ensure you actually run. We are finally making shift left enforceable. For those deep in the code, you know that infrastructure as code, or IAC, means you're provisioning servers via scripts rather than clicking buttons in a console.
Right.
What this new FinOps model does is injecting a pricing API directly into that script. So before an engineer even hits merge on their pull request, a bot automatically comments, hey, this architecture change you are proposing will add $4,000 to our monthly cloud bill. Do you have budget approval?
Which sounds great in theory, but
And we also have automated overnight right-sizing. If a non-production workload isn't receiving traffic at 2 a.m., the deployment pipeline dynamically downscales it to 0. Cost constraints have literally become engineering constraints.
hold on, I have to stop you there. I don't buy the elegant automation argument for a second.
Why not? The tech is there.
Because of how it plays out in reality, I will acknowledge that from a purely technical standpoint, dynamically downscaling non-production workloads sounds fantastic. But what actually happens when your automated right-sizing script kills a stateful database mid-transaction because it looked idle to the monitoring tool?
Well, you tune the parameters.
No, engineering overrides the automation. They hard-code exceptions. And more importantly, look at the broader organizational cost of this transition. If your FinOps practitioners now have to reskill into system design, learn Kubernetes resource allocation, and achieve IAC proficiency, the crucial bridge to the CFO completely erodes.
I don't see it as eroding, I see it as evolving.
You've built a very smart treadmill that forces the runner to keep pace, sure, but you've completely blinded the person actually paying the gym's electricity bill. If the cost data is no longer sitting directly adjacent to the finance department, who is actively correlating the infrastructure spend to actual business performance? Who is integrating this into enterprise-wide financial planning?
But you're assuming the CFO is the only one who knows how to read the health of the business. The truth is, the connection to business performance doesn't disappear just because it moved to the CTO. It actually evolves into a much more precise metric.
A metric they control?
And this gets to the core of how the shift in who governs fundamentally changes how we measure success. Finance-owned FinOps was obsessed with absolute dollar savings. It was a race to the bottom. But CTO-owned FinOps measures efficiency through unit economics. We are looking at the cost per 10,000 API calls or the cost per active customer transaction.
Which is incredibly easy to manipulate.
Let me put it plainly first. A $5 million cloud bill that successfully supports $50 million in revenue is infinitely healthier for a business than cutting that bill down to $3 million, but crippling the microservice architecture so badly that latency spikes and revenue drops to $25 million. Unit economics is a vastly superior metric because it aligns the cost of the technology directly with the value it delivers to the customer.
That sounds great in the boardroom, but drill down into why unit economics is so dangerous in practice. We have to be brutally honest about how corporate politics function.
Oh, here we go.
Look, a significant portion of finance-sponsored FinOps teams used to build their political capital on managing the gap, finding waste, reporting it, and justifying their own existence. Now, by moving this to engineering, you are handing the grading rubric directly to the people taking the test.
That is a very cynical view of engineering leadership.
Efficiency is a much harder story for a CFO to verify than actual dollar savings. Let me give you a very concrete example. If I am an engineering manager and I am being graded on my cost per execution, I can easily alter my architecture to spin up 1,000 tiny, virtually useless microservices.
Nobody is going to do that.
They will if it games the system. My total cloud bill goes up by $2 million, but because the denominator in my equation artificially inflated, my cost per execution drops by 2%. I get to go to the quarterly business review and tell the CFO I'm operating more efficiently, while I am actually burning company cash. It makes it incredibly easy for engineering leaders to hide wasteful, overly complex architecture behind a veneer of technical efficiency.
I don't accept that hypothetical because it completely ignores how mature engineering organizations actually govern themselves. It assumes the CTO's organization is inherently trying to hide waste rather than optimize systems.
It assumes people respond to incentives.
When FinOps was embedded into the platform team, they established per-team cost service level objectives, or SLOs. It is treated exactly like site reliability. If a service exceeds its cost per API call budget, it acts as a circuit breaker.
Wait, a literal circuit breaker.
Yes, it literally breaks the build pipeline or triggers a mandatory architectural review before any new feature can be deployed. The engineers cannot push new code until they fix the cost anomaly. That mechanism is infinitely more rigorous than a quarterly meeting with the CFO where everyone just points fingers at a spreadsheet.
Rigorous for cloud infrastructure, maybe? I will grant you that pipeline circuit breakers work for AWS or Google Cloud deployments. But if the CTO's primary tool for efficiency is the CI/CD pipeline, how on earth does this structure handle the 35% of enterprise software spend that circumvents engineering entirely?
Well, we use different integrations for that.
And this gets to the crux of the SaaS blind spot. That $265 billion in waste still persists despite over 70% of organizations adopting FinOps. And now we have 90% claiming they are quote-unquote managing SaaS. That is just awareness, not governance.
It's the first step to governance.
But it's not the same thing. If the VP of marketing buys 50 seats of ChatGPT Enterprise on a corporate credit card for their team, or if customer success signs a multi-year deal for a new workflow tool, that transaction never touches a pull request. Your automated pre-deployment cost estimation bot is entirely useless for this.
Look, you're absolutely right that traditional cloud tooling, the tagging strategies, the real-time billing feeds, it does not solve the spend intelligence problem for SaaS. They are fundamentally different economic models, and I'm not claiming you can govern a Salesforce contract with a Kubernetes autoscaler.
Exactly, because the SaaS optimization window is strictly the 90 days before a contract renewal. Cloud is real-time, SaaS is locked. Explain the economic behavior here. If you miss that 90-day true-up window with an enterprise vendor, you are locked into paying for another full year, regardless of whether anyone actually logs into the platform.
Right. The renewal trap.
We covered the data on Microsoft 365 Copilot previously. Enterprises are currently paying $30 per user per month for that AI capability, and yet the active usage rate sits at an abysmal 35.8%. Organizations are actively bleeding cash on empty seats.
Which is a huge problem, I agree.
So how is a platform engineer whose daily expertise is in optimizing EC2 instances and managing deployment pipelines supposed to audit the active usage rate of M365 Copilot across the entire global sales department? They don't have the tools, they don't have the visibility, and frankly, they don't have the mandate.
I fully acknowledge the need for specialized spend intelligence platforms to handle this. Tools like Xylo, Tori, Productive, or Blissfully. But here is the exact mechanical reason why the CTO organization is still the absolute right place for this capability to live.
Go on.
Identifying that shadow SaaS in the first place requires deep technical access. It requires monitoring single sign-on logs. It requires analyzing network traffic and zero-trust access gateways to see what unrecognized, unsanctioned AI applications employees are authenticating into.
Wait, network traffic analysis? Are you seriously suggesting a DevOps engineer is going to sit there sniffing network packets to figure out if the VP of marketing bought an AI video generator on a corporate card?
Yes, actually. Or at least they are building the automated integrations that do exactly that. An engineering-aligned FinOps team is infinitely better equipped to integrate SSO log parsing, cloud access security broker data, and network traffic analysis into a centralized dashboard to discover that shadow AI spend.
But discovering it doesn't fix it.
What is the alternative? A finance team relying on a procurement spreadsheet that is 18 months out of date? The engineering organization has the APIs. They own the identity providers, and they own the network security perimeter. They are the only ones who can actually see the shadow usage happening in real time.
Having visibility is not the same as having the operational muscle to execute a reduction. While engineering might have the technical access to the SSO logs to see that someone logged into a shadow app, the actual mechanism of optimizing SaaS requires business unit level auditing, vendor management, and intense contract negotiation.
It requires partnership, sure.
If you're a platform engineer listening to this right now, you are probably rolling your eyes at the idea of doing vendor contract negotiations for Salesforce licenses. And you'd be right to. When you shift FinOps entirely into platform engineering, you are asking a system architect to suddenly become a ruthless procurement negotiator. It is a fundamental mismatch of skill sets.
I think that's a bit of an exaggeration.
The explosion of AI SaaS, which is being shadow procured faster than any category in the history of enterprise software, requires strict business-aligned financial control. The optimization tools are entirely incompatible. Cloud right-sizing tells you to kill a server running at 10% CPU. SaaS right-sizing tells you that 140 of your 500 enterprise software licenses had 0 logins over the last 90 days, and you need to claw them back from department heads who will fight you to keep them.
Right.
It is the same underlying principle of eliminating waste, but it uses completely different data sources and requires completely different operational muscles.
But those operational muscles have to be centralized where the technology is actually governed. Look, the evolution of FinOps into the CTO organization is undeniably painful. I will not pretend for a second that the reskilling isn't difficult.
It's massive.
But it is a necessary structural transition from a retrospective reporting culture to a culture of systemic default efficiency. The capability gap for managing SaaS within engineering is absolutely real today. But embedding financial discipline directly into developer portals and treating cost as a non-functional requirement right alongside security and application performance is the only path that actually scales. You simply cannot spreadsheet your way out of a dynamically scaling, multi-cloud AI-integrated infrastructure. It moves too fast.
And I maintain that the 2026 rebranding by the industry calling this shift managing the value of technology is dangerously premature. What we have right now is the definition of a perfect storm. We are moving cost governance away from the strict scrutiny of finance at the exact moment we are absorbing a massive, highly decentralized, shadow-procured AI SaaS market.
A storm is definitely brewing.
Organizations are setting themselves up for a very painful reality check. They are going to celebrate brilliant, highly complex efficiency unit metrics in their CI/CD pipelines, patting themselves on the back for optimizing microservices while simultaneously bleeding millions of dollars out the back door on unused auto-renewing AI licenses that no one in engineering has the authority, the desire, or the business acumen to cancel.
I think where we fundamentally converge today is on the reality that the scope of technology cost management has exploded far faster than the organizational capabilities required to handle it. The traditional 2023 FinOps playbook, where finance produces a showback report 30 days after the money is already spent and just hopes engineering behaves better next month, is officially obsolete.
Agreed. The sheer velocity of the market, particularly with the introduction of generative AI features bundled into every conceivable enterprise software tier, has completely outpaced our legacy governance structures. We have to figure out how to view that $265 billion waste problem through both lenses simultaneously.
Exactly.
We need the strict, ruthless execution of engineering automation at the infrastructure layer and the unyielding financial accountability of the CFO at the contract layer.
There is definitely much more to explore here, particularly regarding how AI will further complicate vendor lock-in through proprietary data moats, making switching costs even more astronomical. It leaves us with a critical question for leadership as we head into the 2027 budget season.
Which organizational model will actually survive the scrutiny when the massive AI bills inevitably come due?
Exactly, because at the end of the day, you can build the most sophisticated, self-adjusting engine management system in the world, perfectly calibrated to optimize every drop of fuel. But if nobody is actually watching the total credit card bill at the gas station, you are still going to run the business off the road. We will leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us.